I mean, the fact that it's still here and functioning and states are showing up, civil society is showing up, that means it's working. Because the worst case scenario is disinvestment. And then in terms of moving forward, I think we should not take anything for granted, and that we need to be really vigilant to, first of all, safeguard what we already have, and then push for more space for more action. But definitely to not assume because this is how it has been for the last 20 years, so it would continue to be like that for the last 20 years.
Aloha and welcome to Cooper Union, what's happening with human rights around our world. And today we're very fortunate to be here with Salma representing the International Service for Human Rights. Salma is an amazing presence here in the international human rights mechanisms, and most people would probably recognize her from amazing side events that bring issues up from the ground to the global level, but also the final voice that we all hear when the session of the Human Rights Council concludes, when civil society gives a point of what we think are the most important elements that has taken place during that session. Salma, thank you so much for joining us.
Thank you so much. Thank you so much. I'm really glad to be with you here.
When we look at the 20th anniversary of the UN Human Rights Council, we just had the 60-second session. What would you say as where we've come in the trends in these 20 years and these 2 decades of this new mechanism? I know it used to be a commission on human rights that only met once a year, and now we have this Human Rights Council that meets 3 times a year. But as we reflect on 20th anniversary, what are some perspectives you'd like to share with us?
No, indeed. So that was really dominant in the conversations at this session. So, for example, there was a meeting or an event that was convened by the HRC president in the Assembly Hall to take stock of the Council's achievements and discuss ways to progress even further. There was also a resolution that was tabled and just adopted this session by a number of countries under the leadership of Mexico to mark the Council's 20th anniversary. And in the negotiations of that resolution, key challenges also not emerged, but were highlighted, because this is part of the challenges of the Human Rights Council. But before I get into that, I think the most significant contribution of the Council includes really its contribution of how it advances standards and develops international law, what it contributes in terms of prevention. And actually it's quite timely that at this session, the last 60-second session, there was the convening of an urgent debate on the situation in Al Ubaid in Sudan as a means of preventing further atrocities. And there was a resolution that was adopted also following that urgent debate. And also the Council's role in promoting accountability for atrocity crimes and other grave violations from across the world. But it's not only the piece of accountability, but also it's a space and it's a tool to promote cooperation and dialogue that is inclusive of civil society, victims, and persons directly impacted. And it also provides a means to provide support to states to implement human rights situation, to uphold their human rights obligations on the ground. And we see increasingly states requesting the Council for technical assistance, using the Council to adopt resolutions to get a budget for opening an office in their countries. So these, it's different parts of the council that make it effective. At the same time, it's really important to unpack a bit what makes the council successful, and the key issue here is that it requires the active, safe, and unhindered participation of civil society from across generations. And for civil society to be able to participate effectively, that means that it should be free from intimidations and free from reprisals, but also that they are able to also participate remotely. So now we have, and this is since only 2020 that we have the possibility of video statement, pre-recorded video statements. We also had the hybrid modality, so live participation in the negotiations, but that is no longer the case for financial constraints. So we keep pushing for the reinstatement of hybrid modalities. So that's from the civil society piece. Now, from the states piece, it really requires also the meaningful and constructive cooperation by the states and with the council and the mechanisms, and that includes the UPR. So this is the main key takeaways from this. Now, in terms of how the negotiations around that resolution took place. So there, as expected, there was pushback to remove references to human rights defenders, to civil society. There was also, this is something that we are, a new trend that we are seeing in the last couple of sessions, where basically state representatives are saying that we are also being intimidated and harassed and facing reprisals, and so the council needs to take that into consideration, and they are pushing. They are pushing a language saying that all participants, including NGOs and civil society, so naming us, should do their work in a manner that's consistent with principles, and refrain from acts of intimidation and reprisals. And so here it's a bit of a danger, because when you are calling out a state, when you are pushing for accountability, it does not mean that this is intimidation or reprisal. So there's a power imbalance here, but and this we have to keep pushing back against. And there was several amendments that were tabled on this resolution by Russia, that includes on reprisals, includes on the ECOSOC committee, includes also on the funding. I mean, in the end, the core group did a really good job of maintaining the references to defenders, and they just moved around some language. And in the end, the resolution basically recognizes the contributions of all stakeholders, and then it names couple of groups like indigenous peoples, people of African descent, defenders, persons with disabilities, etc., and then putting the qualifier of the ECOSOC resolution and the council's founding documents. The IBP. Human Rights Council 5.1. So overall, that's positive. And then the second point is the problem with the liquidity crisis and the budget cuts, because this really represents a major challenge. Like, apart from the political challenges, from the accessibility challenges, in the end, the council adopts resolutions, mandates activities, but then the office cannot implement it because there's no money. And so that's a big problem that we are advocating that states need to address by providing adequate, predictable, increased, and sustainable funding to the UN's human rights pillar as a whole. And some good news, which is rare, is that just recently the General Assembly Fifth Committee, so in New York, they decided to suspend the return of cash that is unspent. So that was a financial rule that meant that basically when states pay late, and so the UN didn't have time to spend the money because they paid, in December, and the year closes at the end of December, they would have to return that as credits, and so that's now suspended, which does alleviate the impact of the liquidity crisis, but it still does not solve the core problem, which is states not paying up what they owe in full and on time. And the most egregious violators of that obligation is the United States and China, who also pay the most because of the the calculation. And so that's, you know, a big part of the problem, but it's not only them. It's just because proportionally it's a lot of money, but other states as well are not paying in full on time.
No, thank you for that view, because it's so hard to understand the insides and outsides of the Human Rights Council and what happens at the Palais des Nations. So that's extremely helpful. And maybe we could look at how the session does evolve. In the beginning, with the High Commissioner for Human Rights raising issues in the dawn of the session, were there any highlights in those speeches, or maybe also the panels that take place? Was there one or two panels that were most important for civil society and for people around the world to be aware of?
Yes, so exactly. So the High Commissioner provides the global update, and then there's the dialogue, and then they move on to the specific country situations, and then thematic situations. For me, the key highlight that was really moving in the room was the debate with the Special Rapporteur on Health, because it was her last presentation to the Council. And so, you know, if I would suggest for the viewers to watch, you know, 5 minutes of the entire session, that would be the closing, the closing remark of Dr. T. It was really moving. And yeah, like I cannot do it justice by trying to paraphrase it. So really do look into that. And also all the NGO statements preceding that, almost all of them, they were really supportive and acknowledging the amazing work that she did in the 6 years of her mandate. I think another trend that I want to highlight, and especially relevant to this to the June sessions, because it's more the gender sessions, is that more and more we see anti-rights actors in that space using different tactics, right? So you'll see that there's so many amendments against the gender resolutions that the core group, those presenting the amendments, they know that it's not going to be adopted, but they still do it, and it kind of serves the purpose of disrupting and prolonging negotiations. And then, you know, the overall objective of their vision is to push for more regressive language on gender. So that's that. And then the other thing I wanted to highlight, like as a key highlight of this session, is actually the success of the advocacy of civil society around the resolution on women and girls in humanitarian settings. So this was actually the first UN resolution to explicitly mention reproductive violence, that it acknowledges the gravity of these acts or the omissions that are aimed at harming one's reproductive autonomy. And it also acknowledged that this form of violence can constitute genocidal acts, such as an attempt to destroy a group. So this is really important. This is a thematic resolution. And so it's really important that we have this standard that applies globally, and then civil society in different contexts can use that to advocate and push for their advocacy.
Excellent. And Dr. T, I remember meeting her in New York, and quite a presence and an amazing way to really transform the role of the special procedures. You can see how a rapporteur can really engage with civil society and, more importantly, take their mandate to a new level through popular education, through activism, in so many forms. So I will definitely encourage our viewers to go there. On the panel side, as well as other special council procedures, special rapporteurs, independent experts, working groups, what do you feel were some of the important aspects that were raised and that people should be aware of in this 60-second session?
Yeah, so I would also flag the report of the independent expert on sexual orientation and gender identity. It was on lesbian, bisexual, and queer women, which marked really a historical milestone because LGBTQ women, they face distinct intersecting violations, and so that includes gender-based violence, systemic exclusion that usually kind of falls between the cracks of the traditional human rights framework. And so this report was very important because it bridged that critical protection gap, and it also gave a really long overdue institutional visibility to their experience. So that's also a key highlight of the Special Rapporteur's report.
Excellent. And then as we look, I know we were here focusing a lot on the UPR adoptions. There was the adoption of Australia's UPR and the other ones. How is the UPR adoption, and why is it so important that this happened 6 months after the 3.5-hour review? Were there any that you thought were important and other areas that NGOs should be involved with to then make sure that as they move from adoption to implementation, that these recommendations made in these halls don't just stay there, but actually changing on the ground?
Yes, so the reason for the 6 months is to give the state enough time to coordinate internally and come back with their position, their responses, so that it's meaningful, right? It's not just a tick the box exercise. And it's also a really important space for us as civil society because it's the only time where we get to speak. So if the organization has ECOSOC status or is partnering with an organization that has ECOSOC status, that is the moment where they get to speak in the UPR process. And you don't have to travel to Geneva to do it. You can do it by video statement. It's 2 minutes. And my advice is when signing up, even if you see that you are at the bottom of the list and you might not get a chance, still do the video, upload the video, because there's usually a lot of cancellations, and so you might end up getting the chance to speak. And then in terms of implementation, so the work doesn't stop with the adoption of the report. It actually starts, right? And so then civil society who had pushed for states to raise certain recommendations, which they did, which the state accepted, now they have a tool to hold the state accountable to implement that recommendation. And usually the UPR is also an opportunity for civil society to create coalitions like around the submission. And so then it can be an opportunity to use that coalition that came together for the submission to work on a plan on how they're gonna advocate for the implementation of the recommendation that they managed to get.
Good news is we get to be we put the documents in first. So we get the first submission where civil society gets together and sort of point out what we believe is most important, since our reports are submitted first. And that is a foundation, along with the other 10-page document prepared by the High Commissioner for Human Rights and the 20 pages by the government. And then the exciting part, as you pointed out so accurately, we actually give the final word. The government is able to state its case. It's able to say what it's done since the consideration, and other countries get to say if they're concerned with more human rights violations or if they see an improvement. But we, the civil society, get those 10 slots for 2-minute interventions to really make that final case of what has to be done going forward as we move towards implementation. Maybe you could share a bit about some of the resolutions. At every session, certain resolutions come up. Maybe you can share which resolutions are the prominent ones, and then some of the highlights of those resolutions building on the great parts that you've already shared earlier.
No, sure. So in the June sessions, it's as I said, it's the gender resolution. So we talked about the women and girls in humanitarian settings. There's also the resolution on discrimination against women and girls. And so this session, it focused on care and support systems, and it referenced the structural causes of discrimination against women and girls in this context. And that includes restrictions to the right to bodily autonomy, also the discriminatory stereotypes about what is deemed women's work. And what was really good about that resolution is that it included a recognition that the disproportionate burden of unpaid care work limits women and girls' opportunities, access to education, decent work, health, and participation in public life. And it called on states to transform care systems through legal, fiscal, and policy measures. Another important gender resolution in this session was the child early and forced marriage. And this one, it focused on guidelines that the ISHR had issued, and so it really focused. It tried to ground that resolution in implementation and results, and it also provided a link between previous resolutions adopted by the Council, and then the positive, tangible change that they can have on people's lives. Another key resolution that's always coming up in the June session, and it's subject to long hours of negotiations because of the importance of the topic, it's on human rights and climate change. And so this year's resolution, it was focused on adaptation and future generations. It continued to advance the right to a healthy, to a clean, healthy, and sustainable environment. It made a reference to the International Court of Justice advisory opinion on climate change. It also recognized the importance of adaptation measures as a significant step to avert, minimize, and address loss and damage from the impacts of climate change. And it also recognized that climate change poses severe threats to present and future generations. Now, wasn't all good. There's also shortcomings and things that we had, civil society had pushed for that didn't make it in the text. So the impact of the language of the impact of climate change on future generations, that was watered down in the negotiations. And then secondly, again, it failed to explicitly mention that fossil fuels are the root cause of climate change, and that states have an obligation to transition away from them, which is really core to the issue that we are discussing. And so we will continue calling on states that basically, if they need to take, effective climate action through resolutions at the Human Rights Council, they need to finally admit that fossil fuels are the main driver of the climate change and other planetary crises. And this is not news, right? Like, this is confirmed and stated repeatedly by science, by the Secretary General, High Commissioner, Special Rapporteur. So it's just a question of political will of the states of finally admitting the reality. And then the other shortcoming is that despite several delegations raising this ask and civil society, it doesn't mention the positive, important, and legitimate role that environmental human rights defenders play, in particular in the context of climate change. And it also doesn't include language on ensuring access to information and meaningful and inclusive participation for defenders in decision-making processes, which is really key for climate justice. Let me maybe stop here on the resolutions.
No, it's super helpful, because we know the gender resolution is so important on each word, and then the paragraphs, pulling them together. Many people aren't aware that, the holder of the pen, those governments come in, that they have those drafts, that they have the meetings in the weeks throughout the session, and that civil society can come in and provide some changes and write certain aspects and make final statements after the room is done looking at the text. So it's really appreciative for you to share those aspects of what advocacy can accomplish. And then the climate change one is also one of the main ones. And it's great to see the International Court of Justice advisory opinion, some language from there, making it into this one. And then seeing also maybe the advisory opinion also of the Inter-American Court of Human Rights. We see then that the human rights and climate change, we can combine Geneva and wherever the COP is, and that they're not mutually exclusive, and that through time at the Human Rights Council, these resolutions then session by session and year by year, we can see civil society focusing on climate change and human rights to really make those links. And as you say, we don't get everything that we want in these process. We as civil society are really the oxygen in the room, and we're the ones that provide that information, and we're the ones on the ground. And I think the one other point you mentioned that's so crucial is that environmental human rights defenders, because it's the people protecting the land that are standing up for those most important rights, and most importantly are the ones that are protecting the planet from these shameful corporations. And as has been pointed out, 57 corporations are producing most of the fossil fuels, and we could see some momentum, I think, even though we didn't get everything we had hoped for, from the Santa Marta process that was taking place between the Netherlands and Colombia to try to find a way for the coalition of the willing to work more on climate justice and loss and damage and bring these points together to build on the success of these advisory opinions. Maybe another part that's so exciting that people spend a lot of energy on are side events. Maybe you could share some of the side events that ISHR had sponsored. Maybe you could share also some side events that were very important to attend, and how those side events then have an impact actually in the council, but then more importantly also at home.
Yes, so side events are really important because basically it is the space where you get to set the agenda, set the narrative, and choose who is on the panel, and happening, in the same venue as the main discussions in the plenary. And it's an opportunity not just for states to hear what civil society is saying, but also to connect with other civil society and then find synergies and network. And also, it's a very powerful visibility tool to broadcast back home and to show that basically the issues that civil society is working on back home is being visible and is being spoken about in the UN. So, in terms of if I had to pick two side events, one ISHR co-sponsored. It was organized by Defend Defenders and co-sponsored by several other organizations, and it was about the 20th anniversary of the Human Rights Council. And the question wasn't what does civil society bring to the council, but the other way around. What does the council bring to civil society? And so there was different speakers. One speaker who spoke about what they managed to get out of the UPR process in their advocacy. Another speaker about what they managed to get from communications by special procedures. Another speaker spoke about what they managed to get out of an accountability mechanism, like an investigation, international investigation. And so it was really interesting to see the different tools the council can provide to civil society and how they can use them. And then the other event which ISHR organized was about examining how systemic discrimination and democratic backsliding are deeply intertwined. And so this side event, it coincided with the annual training program that ISHR hosts in the June sessions. And so it included defenders who were participating in this training program, and they drew on their lived experiences in that panel, and they argued showed how marginalized communities are often really the first to detect authoritarian practices, and they offered concrete recommendations for building a more inclusive and resilient democracies. And I just want to read you one quote from one of the defenders, Amity Dimok from the US. So she said that by the time democratic erosion becomes obvious to everyone, it has usually been obvious to the marginalized communities for years. And that really resonates because they are the first to bear to experience the democratic erosion. So maybe I can speak a bit about the key messages or the recommendations of what states need to do. And so one is that it's not just enough to document harm, that the international community must really drive the implementation of these recommendations and ensure accountability. And secondly is about access, that activists, people directly impacted, they need direct access to the international mechanisms to advocate in their own behalf. And then three is that in our political analysis of the context, we need to focus on structural violations and where is the power concentrated. And so asking basically who violated which structures and who is benefiting from the public institutions that are structured to make these violations, to commit these violations. And then last but not least, about the importance of creating really dedicated space for marginalized communities so that they can raise their concerns, and that it's not only during participation in democratic processes, but also on accessibility and the suitability of public services.
Oh, it's really the most important points as we look at it. And I know from bringing directly impacted peoples, indigenous peoples, minorities are already seeing firsthand what happens. And unfortunately, by the time it's reported on, it's something that has already caused the end of some lives and also polluted and destroyed an entire sacred homeland. So these really side events are the space where most people love going to those, because they get to hear directly from people who come from the ground to share here at the global level. And you can see the hope that people put into international human rights institutions that are based here in Geneva and New York. As we look and we're closing, I think we're looking outside, and I remember being actually in this courtyard on the opening day of 19 June 2006, and what we had looked and hoped this would be. And we just recently had a meeting with the Human Rights Council president to start those conversations. Do you feel that it's moving in the right direction in certain areas, or what do you think we need to concentrate on going forward in the next decade and the next 20 years?
I mean, the fact that it's still here and functioning and states are showing up, civil society is showing up, that means it's working. Because the worst case scenario is disinvestment. And then in terms of moving forward, I think we should not take anything for granted, and that we need to be really vigilant to, first of all, safeguard what we already have, and then push for more space for more action. But definitely to not assume, because this is how it has been for the last 20 years, so it would continue to be like that for the last 20 years. And our biggest challenge that is coming up now is the non-cooperation of the United States with the UPR, because they have to conclude the 4th cycle in order to start the 5th cycle next year, and for it to be universal, all the states need to show up. And so there are 4 states that haven't cooperated for. There are three pending states for this UPR. So Nicaragua, they participated in the review, but they refused to show up for the adoption. Myanmar, it's because of the credentials issue with the General Assembly, and the Council actually just adopted a decision, the 62nd session, to postpone the UPR of Myanmar until the credentials issue is fixed by the General Assembly. So it's a bit of a different context. And then the United States is the biggest problem, because they didn't show up to the actual review. And so the question is now, what will the Council do? The Council cannot let them off the hook, because then it will undermine the whole point of the universality of the UPR, and it will also give incentive to states to not show up. So I think that's the most urgent upcoming battle, to make sure the Council can continue to function.
So I agree with you. This UPR of the US and the non-cooperation is crucial. We normally only have the November session and then the January session, and then it would be the end of the 4th cycle. And that hasn't happened before. When other countries such as Israel didn't show up, everyone encouraged them so that they did participate before the conclusion of that cycle. So we have a lot of work ahead of us, but we thank you for all the work you've been doing during that 62nd session and many more before then. And we look forward to engaging with you regularly at Cooper Union, covering the follow-up of what happens at the Human Rights Council sessions. Mahalo, thank you.
Thank you.